The village, known as Darrah-e-Khazan, lay under an eerie silence. Nestled in the lap of the mountains, its roads were unpaved, the electricity lines broken and hanging loose, and as night fell, people locked themselves inside their homes. At the edge of the village stood an old, crumbling mansion that people called Andhi Kothri. No one remembered its original name anymore. Its walls were so ancient that cracks spread across them like fallen autumn leaves. The roof had partially collapsed, the doors screeched when opened, and wild shrubs had overtaken the courtyard, swaying in the night wind like a demonic dance. The villagers kept their distance from the mansion. Children covered their ears, even while passing nearby, for it was said that in one of its rooms, forever drowned in darkness, something hid that drained the human soul. The elders claimed the mansion dated back to British rule, when an English officer once lived there. One day, the officer entered that room and never came out again. His body was never found. Only the echo of his scream remained, still said to haunt the nights. The women of the village believed the place was cursed, inhabited by jinns and spirits. Even the men dared not touch it, for anyone who crossed its threshold either returned insane or vanished without a trace. At night, when moonlight spilled over the mountains, strange shadows could be seen peering out from the mansion's windows. Once, a shepherd passing nearby claimed he saw a white figure standing in the courtyard, moving slowly. He ran back to the village in terror and brought others with him. But when they arrived, there was nothing, only a broken clay pot and stains as red as blood. The story spread quickly, deepening the villagers' fear. Grandmother Zarmina lived alone in that mansion. She was an elderly woman, perhaps over 80 years old. Her skin was lined with deep wrinkles, her eyes dark and sunken, her hair white and untidy. She spoke very little, almost not at all. The villagers greeted her when they saw her, and she would only nod in response. It was said her entire family had died years ago in a tragic accident, leaving her the sole survivor. The mansion was her ancestral property, and she refused to abandon it. During the day, she sat in the courtyard growing vegetables or reading old books. But as night fell, she went inside and bolted the door. After dark, villagers often heard strange sounds coming from her house, sometimes sobbing, sometimes laughter, sometimes the echo of footsteps resounding across the floor. One night, a village woman noticed a faint glow emerging from Zarmina's window, even though no candle was ever lit there. She went closer and saw the old woman standing before the door of a room that was always kept shut. There was no lock on it, yet she made no attempt to open it. She only stared at it, as if someone stood behind the door. The woman asked, "Grandmother, what is it?" Zarmina turned slowly and replied, "There's someone there. He is waiting." The villagers began to say that Zarmina was no longer human, but a shadow possessed by some dark force. Some claimed she spoke with jinns at night, and the voices people heard belonged to them. Then one day, Grandmother Zarmina suddenly disappeared. There was no funeral, no grave, nothing. The villagers searched for her, but the mansion stood empty. Her shawl lay in the courtyard, soaked with blood-red stains. The door of that room remained shut, yet a strange odor seeped out from beneath it, like that of a rotting corpse. When people tried to force the door open, it wouldn't budge, as if it were fused shut. One man whispered, "This is Zarmina's doing. She is still here, just unseen." Terrified, the villagers retreated and abandoned the mansion altogether. But her disappearance was only the beginning. A few months later, the stubborn curiosity of a young man would make the secret far more horrifying. The village youth, Sajid, was an educated young man. He had studied in Peshawar, where he earned an education in science. He did not believe in jinns or ghosts. According to him, everything was a product of the human mind. Fear doesn't live in places, it lives in the brain, he often said. The villagers laughed at his words, but Sajid didn't care. When Grandmother Zarmina disappeared, rumors spread through the village that a demon lived in the mansion. Hearing this, Sajid announced that he would spend the night there to prove that it was all nonsense. His friends tried to stop him. "Don't go. That place is cursed," they warned. Sajid laughed and replied, "I'll take a torch, my mobile phone, and a register. I'll note down everything that happens every hour. In the morning, you'll see. I'll come out alive and perfectly fine." He began preparing. Extra batteries for his phone, fresh batteries for the torch, and a pen and a register. He decided that even if something strange happened, he would record it scientifically. An old village woman tried to stop him and said, "Son, grandmother's Armina is still there. She's standing behind that door. Don't go." Sajid laughed again and replied, "She's either dead or she ran away." At dusk, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Sajid walked toward the mansion. The villagers watched from a distance. The air was cold, and the branches of the trees seemed to scream in the wind. Sajid pushed the door open. It let out a sharp, piercing shriek. Inside, it was pitch dark, but he stepped in anyway. He shut the door behind him, switched on his torch, and thought, "This is just an old building." But as soon as he reached the courtyard, he felt as if someone was watching him. A shadow peeked out from behind a wall, but when he shone the torch, there was nothing. His heartbeat quickened, yet he calmed himself. This was only the beginning. The night was still long. Sajid stood in the courtyard. Wild shrubs had grown everywhere, swaying in the wind as if they were alive. Broken bricks were scattered across the floor, and spider webs clung to the walls. In the torchlight, he noticed a closed room on one side, perhaps the very Andhi Kothri. The door was wooden, old, and riddled with cracks. He stepped closer, but didn't try to open it. Not yet, he thought. First, he wanted to inspect the rest of the house. Moving forward, he entered another room filled with old cupboards. He opened one and found worn clothes and aged books inside. One book had grandmother's Armina's name written on it. When he opened it, the pages were marked with strange scratches, as if someone had clawed at them with fingernails. A strange chill ran through him, but he wrote in his register, 8 p.m. The house is old, but nothing unusual. He stepped back into the courtyard and sat down. The night was growing deeper, stars shimmering across the sky. Suddenly, a sound echoed, like footsteps. Sajid flashed his torch, but there was nothing. Probably rats, he thought. As time passed, a foul smell filled the air, like decay. He stood up and followed it. The smell was coming from the closed room. A cold gust of air slipped out from beneath the door, raising goosebumps on his skin. He pressed his ear against it and felt as if someone was sobbing inside. His heart began to race. "This is just my imagination," he told himself, and returned to sit down. But now, voices seemed to rise from every direction. Laughter, crying, whispers. Sajid pulled out his phone and checked the time. 10 p.m. He wrote in his register, "Sounds heard? Possibly wind noise." Yet deep inside, a growing fear tightened its grip, one he was desperately trying to suppress. The night was still young, and the secrets of the mansion were about to reveal themselves. 11 o'clock at night. Sajid sat in the courtyard. The beam of his torch was growing weak, so he was trying to conserve it. Suddenly, a faint glow began to spill out from the ventilator, despite the fact that there was no light source there. Sajid stood up and realized the glow was coming from the sealed room. A wave of fear surged through him. He stepped closer and placed his hand on the door. It was ice cold, cold like frozen stone. From inside came a voice, as if someone were calling his name. "Sajid, come inside." His name. Who knew he was here? He stepped back, but the voice grew louder. Now it sounded like a woman crying. Grandmother's Armina? He thought, but that was impossible. She was dead. With trembling hands, Sajid pulled out his register and wrote, 11 p.m., voices. My name being called. Must be imagination. But now the walls seemed to tremble. A tall, white shadow appeared in the courtyard. He flashed the torch. It vanished. His heartbeat thundered so loudly it echoed in his ears. He sat down and shut his eyes. But what good were closed eyes? The voices were coming closer now, like approaching footsteps. Suddenly, a cold hand landed on his shoulder. Sajid screamed and jumped up, but there was no one there. What is happening? He thought. The stench grew stronger, and the glow from the ventilator spread into the courtyard. He stared at the door from which the voice came again. Open the door. I'm waiting. Every hair on Sajid's body stood on end. It was exactly midnight. Absolute silence filled the courtyard, broken only by the distant whistling of wind descending from the mountains. Sajid stood in the center, his torch battery nearly dead, the light fading with every second. Sweat streamed down his face despite the cold. His breathing was rapid, his heart pounding violently in his ears. He was standing directly in front of the dark room's door, the door he had not dared to touch until now. It was made of old, rotting wood, split with deep cracks. From a thin gap at the bottom, a cold, damp draft seeped out. The stench was unbearable now, rotting flesh mixed with soil and blood. His hands trembled. He set the register on the ground, the pen still clutched in his fingers. His final note read, 12 a.m. Voices are close now. My name is being called. Suddenly, a voice spoke from inside, soft, sweet, and horrifying. A woman's voice. It was grandmother Zarmina's voice, but something else was mixed into it, as if two voices were speaking at once. Sajid, my child, open the door. I'm alone. I'm so cold. Sajid's skin crawled. He stepped back, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. He tried to scream, but his voice died in his throat. The door began to move on its own, slowly at first, then violently. The wood screeched, as if a lock sealed for decades was being torn apart. A narrow crack opened, and from it spilled a dim, reddish light. Light unlike any candle or bulb, as if something inside was burning. From the gap, a white hand emerged, thin, wrinkled with long black nails. It crawled across the door like a spider. Then another hand, and then a face appeared in the crack. It was grandmother Zarmina's face, but her eyes were red, her mouth gaping open, blood dripping from her teeth. Her smile was something no human could ever possess. Come, you're already here now. The time to run is past. The door burst open. Inside was darkness, but within the glow, shapes became visible. Old, decaying corpses hanging from the walls, swaying slowly as if just awakened. One corpse lifted its arm and pointed directly at Sajid. Written in blood across the walls were the words, "No one lives alone here." Sajid's scream tore through the courtyard, a scream not of a man, but of an animal about to be slaughtered. He tried to run, but a violent gust of wind erupted from the room, dragging him inside. His legs lifted off the ground, as if invisible hands were pulling him. He slammed onto the floor, his head striking stone, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw was grandmother Zarmina's shadow bending over him, her red eyes piercing straight into his soul. His hair began to turn white, strand by strand. His scream slowly faded. The door slammed shut once more, but laughter continued to echo from inside. The villagers heard the scream from afar, and terror rippled through their bodies. The Andhi Kothri had claimed another victim. The night was not yet over, but Sajid's life had been changed forever. Dawn was still some time away, but a reddish glow had already spread across the sky. The villagers had not slept all night. Sajid's scream had awakened everyone. A scream that could not have come from a human throat, but sounded like a soul writhing in torment. The elders understood immediately that the Andhi Kothri had claimed its prey, but the younger men gathered their courage and headed toward the mansion at first light. There were 10 or 12 of them, carrying wooden sticks and iron rods. One elder held the Quran in his hands. The air was still cold, yet fear sent heat rushing through their bodies. The main gate of the mansion stood open, as if Sajid had never closed it when he entered. As soon as they stepped into the courtyard, their eyes froze on a single sight. Sajid was sitting on the ground, his back pressed against the wall, legs stretched out. His eyes were wide open, but there was no life in them, only emptiness, as if his soul had already departed. His hair, black and thick just the day before, had turned completely white, each strand gleaming like silver. His face was pale, his lips blue, and beads of sweat still clung to his body despite the freezing night. In his right hand, he was clutching the same register he had carried with him. The fingers of his left hand had scraped against the ground, as if he had been trying to write a message, but only meaningless lines remained. One man called out softly, Sajid, son, Sajid. There was no response. He stepped closer and placed a hand on Sajid's shoulder. His body was ice cold, like frozen stone. Sajid's eyes shifted slightly, but he was not looking at anyone. He was staring at a single point, the door of the dark room. The register was opened. On the final page, written in trembling, crooked letters, as if penned at the moment of death, were these words. No one lives alone here. Grandmother Zarmina is still alive. She is standing behind the door. She is watching me. Never open the door of the Andhi Kothri. Now she's inside my eyes. As these words were read, terror ran through every body. One young man glanced toward the dark room. The door was shut again, but the same stench of decay seeped out from beneath it. Fresh claw marks were visible on the wood, deep, long gouges, as if something had been scratching from the inside. A faint rustling sound came from within, like slow footsteps. Everyone stepped back. Sajid was lifted. His body felt unbearably heavy, and he could not walk on his own. As they carried him home, his eyes remained fixed on that same door. They laid him on a bed, but he did not speak, cry, or laugh. He only stared blankly at the ceiling. At night, he would suddenly scream, his body twisting, his hands clawing at the air as if something were dragging him away. When his mother sat beside him, he did not see her. He saw only a red-eyed shadow that no one else could see. Within days, his condition worsened. He stopped eating and drinking, his body growing weaker. He was taken to a mental asylum, but nothing changed. The doctor said it was severe psychological trauma. The villagers knew better. This was not trauma. It was a curse. A few weeks later, one night, Sajid took his final breath. Even in death, his eyes remained open, frozen in terror. The mansion was sealed immediately. Locks were fastened to the doors. Amulets hung on the walls. Yet at night, voices still echoed. Sometimes Sajid's scream, sometimes grandmother Zarmina's laughter. The door of the Andhi Kothri remained closed, but everyone knew someone was standing behind it, waiting. After Sajid's death, the village of Darrah-e-Khazan seemed to die with him. People stayed indoors even during the day. Children stopped playing. Once night fell, no one dared step outside. The mansion was completely barricaded. Heavy chains and locks were placed on the main gate. Verses were written on the walls. Iron sheets were hammered onto the door of the dark room. The village cleric gathered everyone to recite prayers and advised them to abandon the place. But the mansion stood at the heart of the village. What could they flee? Months passed. Winter ended. Spring came, then summer, but the fear never left. At night, voices still rose from the mansion. Sometimes it was grandmother Zarmina's gentle voice calling someone by name. Sometimes it was Sajid's scream, erupting at exactly 11 o'clock before fading away. One night, the entire village swore they heard children laughing inside, though no child had ever lived there. The elders would sit together and say, "This curse will never end. What the Andhi Kothri takes, it never releases." The year 2015 arrived. A new cleric came to the village, young and educated. He declared it all superstition and announced after Friday prayers that he would go to the mansion and recite the Quran to drive the jinn away. The villagers tried to stop him, reminding him of Sajid, but he refused to listen. That evening, he entered the mansion carrying the Quran and incense. When the door opened, thick dust lay everywhere, but on the ground were fresh footprints, small ones, like those of a woman. The cleric sat in the courtyard and began reciting. Until 10 o'clock, everything was calm. Then a voice came, soft at first, then louder. "Maulvi Sahib, come. I am alone." The cleric recited faster, but the voice drew closer. The door of the dark room began to shake. The iron sheet screamed. He lit the incense, but the smoke was pulled inward. The last sound the villagers heard was the cleric crying, "O Allah!" Then silence. The next morning, they found him sitting in the courtyard. His hair was white. His eyes were open. A burned Quran lay in his hands. He was alive, but he could not speak. A few days later, he died in the asylum. Then the villagers decided to burn the mansion. One night, they went with torches and oil. The door opened to darkness, But the moment they set fire, a violent gust of wind extinguished every flame. Laughter echoed from inside. Zarminas, Sajids, the clerics, and many others. They ran. The next morning, the mansion stood exactly as before. But written on its wall in fresh blood were the words, "I am here. I will remain forever." Now, it is 2026. The village is slowly emptying. The young have fled to the cities. Only the old remain. The mansion still stands, abandoned, yet alive. At night, a dim light spills from the ventilator, and behind the door of the dark room, someone stands waiting. Sometimes a traveler or tourist arrives, hears the story, laughs, and says, "I'll go see it myself." That night, a scream echoes. The next morning, the villagers find a new white-haired body in the courtyard. Eyes open, a register clutched in hand. And the door of the Andhi Kothri is still closed. But from behind it, a voice whispers, "Who's next?" The curse is not ended. It is eternal, and the Andhi Kothri is always hungry. This story may be fiction, but fear is real. Subscribe for more dark horror stories. Like the video if you survived till the end. And remember, some doors should never be opened.